Good evening, everybody. I'm sure everyone's just jumping right on the call right at 7 o'clock. I'm going to wait for people to come on board. I see maybe one person's with us so far, and we'll give people a second or two to get on, and we hope we're going to have a really engaging evening tonight.
At least that's the plan.
At least that's the plan. Exactly. So I'm Stephanie Brown, and my company is Intelligent Construction Opportunities. And I don't know if I'm talking into the wind right now, but I host this live stream as a way to connect with construction professionals looking to gain insights from the software vendors and tech developers creating the technologies that support construction projects today. My company, Intelligent Construction Opportunities, specifically helps general contractors and trade partners and project managers decide what technologies are right for their projects. This is just a quick little map of the little bit of a selection system and the steps that I take people through. We can do it all with customers, or we can do limited versions of these. So that just gives you a bit of an idea that we assess requirements and we research tech options, go through the full vendor interviews on your behalf, shortlist those technologies, and come out the other side where we also support the post-adoption. So that's in a nutshell what Intelligent Opportunities is all about. We're happy to connect with you, and you can check us out. And our email is info@intelops.com. So that's a fairly easy way for people to access us. If you want more information about how you can work with Intelligent Construction Opportunities, just send us an email at info@intelops.com. So that's that. Today our guest, I'm really happy to say, is Kipp Ivey, and Kipp is currently working with FARO Technologies. FARO Technologies is based out of Florida. Kipp's from Michigan himself, Upper Michigan, he just told me, and has made FARO's made quite the name for itself when it comes to laser scanning technologies, with a lot of depth and a lot of scope, which we'll touch on throughout tonight. I was introduced to Kipp by Anton Marinovich, who is head of sales with one of FARO's sister companies, Hallow Builder, which they bought a couple of years back. I'm glad that Kipp has agreed to join us, as Kipp, in my opinion, as I said, has a broad scope and deep experience working with and evolving many technology processes, including BIM, which I'm sure some of our audience has already implemented in some of their projects. And tonight we're going to get into what is BIM anyway, and 3D realization and all of that. Kipp has a very good, as far as I'm concerned, his arms around the true concept of BIM and understands it for the process it is, and not the technology that oftentimes it's called out as. So anyway, tonight, that's what we're going to do. Kipp has over 30 years of construction experience, and so we're going to get into it. So let's get going. Let's start riffing, Kipp. And first of all, I'd like to start off by wishing you a happy birthday.
Oh, man. Yeah. The big 60 I turned today. And I'm wearing my birthday sweater, because I think it makes me look more intelligent, more like a professor than just a construction dork. But you're right. It's interesting. I started my apprenticeship almost 38 years ago. Was when I first started my apprenticeship after coming out of college. I had kind of taken a year off and traveled in a musical group for a year. And the only reason I mentioned that is I think we'll try to bring that a little bit full circle a little bit later about how being on stage, I believe helped my career over time. But when I first got into the apprenticeship, everything was done manually. I used to think that my father made galvanized fish, because if you look at a gored elbow in the world of sheet metal, um, it looks just like a fish. If you look at the patterns that are
Oh,
created,
yes.
and so when you're doing like a 5 gore elbow, you literally just keep flipping the patterning back over and then do a half pattern on either end, and that would be the end points. And then you had quarter marks, would allow you to tell you which way to rotate it. But the pattern looks just like a fish. So on the wall, there's all these metal fish. And I used to, as a kid, used to think that all my dad did was make metal fish. Um, and somewhere in this house that I have, I've got my father's caber line books. You can look them up online. They're sheet metal layout books from the 50s. And I look at those books and I look at the layout methodologies that were taught back then, and it boggles my mind that today we live in a world where most of that sheet metal layout is done, through CNC plasma tables and so forth. And I always find myself just kind of, waffling in that old world and coming back to the new world, and just what I've seen over the years as this industry has evolved. And so what happened was, after I came out of the apprenticeship, I found myself becoming a journeyman, and then I became a foreman, and then I became a field superintendent, and then I ended up becoming a manager running the northern operations for a large sheet metal firm out of Michigan. And we got purchased, and there's some personality changes between the new owner and the previous owner. And so I was kind of looking for a career change. And I knew a gentleman by the name of Curtis Broughton, who had started a company called Quickpen. And he specialized in making solutions for MEP trades. And Curtis and I hit it off. He was an ex-sheet metal contractor from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so he used to call me all the time, because we used to have this banter about our golf game and about, who was better. And he just called me one day and he said, Kipp, asked me how I was doing about golf. And then finally at the end of the conversation, I looked at him and said, Curtis, you wouldn't want to hire a salesman, would you? And he goes, are you serious? And I said, well, since you answered that way, yeah. And he said, well, can you be to Denver next week? I said, sure, send me a plane ticket. So I flew out to Colorado, and this is late 90s, early 2000.
Yeah.
Came back home. They kind of offered me a job before I left Colorado. Came back home, talked to my wife, and we just kind of rolled the dice and went with completely separate direction.
Now, were you going to get into sales? Was that no?
Well, that wasn't. When you're a sheet metal contractor or any contractor of any sort, it's like you say, why do contractors like to gamble so much, right? The reason is, I think contractors like to gamble so much is every time they put a bid on a piece of paper and they stick it out in the marketplace, they're gambling, right? Because that guy next door has to install the same sheet metal work that I have to install. The mechanical guy's got to install the exact same piping that I have to install. The only thing I'm gambling on is I think I can do it better. I think I can do it faster, or I have the processes in place to allow me to do it better or faster. That's the gamble, right? The materials actually go wash. It all comes down to how long does it take to make it and how long is it going to take to install it. And that's really where the gamble is. And I think that's why a lot of contractors like to go to casinos, because everything they do in their normal day-to-day life is a gamble. And when you look at the average markup on a construction, in North America, for example, it's under 6% is the average markup on a construction project as far as profitability goes. So anything they can do to be more profitable, to improve their internal process, and BIM honestly is one of those processes, anything that they can do that is going to give them an edge or to allow them to incrementally change that percentage margin is going to improve their profitability down the road.
So what was it about Quickpen that made you go, yeah, let's?
Well, I think I remember, watching my dad do takeoffs.
Yeah.
And he taught me how to take off. And he said, look, I don't care what computer you use. I studied computer science in college, and of course it was still done on punch cards back then. But and he said, I don't care what computer you use, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't know how to estimate something, using a computer isn't going to help, because you have to be able to see it, right? You have to be able to understand what you're doing. And so what drew me to Quickpen was the fact that I could do in an hour what would take my dad an entire day, more accurately than he could. Not saying that my dad was probably arguably one of the greatest sheet metal estimators I've personally ever met. But I still could do more in a single day than he could possibly do. So what does that mean? That means we can bid more work. We can get more work, because the thing about estimating is it is pure cost. You can't pass the bill on. You can't call you up, and if I bid a job for you, Stephanie, I can't take that bid and send you a bill and say, hey, I'm sorry I didn't get the job, but here's the bill for me doing your estimate. Right. So estimating was a pure cost function. So I looked at what Curtis was doing, and I believe Curtis brought in
Now, did Curtis develop it himself?
Curtis started with a company called Computer Aided Estimating in the late 70s, actually.
Yeah.
And the reason the name Quickpen came out was Curtis was a sheet metal contractor.
Yes.
And he had retired from a company out of Albuquerque. He had moved up to the Whidbey Island area outside Seattle. And he said he saw somebody using a digitizer, and he said, I could use that to take off ductwork. And so he put up some sticky notes at the local university looking for computer programmers for a new idea for a computer estimating program. And then one of the first guys to answer that phone call is a gentleman by the name of Tom Field. Tom was Quickpen employee number one. And so Tom came to Curtis's house, and they stayed up. You hear the story. They stayed up just highly caffeinated. Of course, Curtis was always highly caffeinated. They stayed up highly caffeinated for 2 or 3 days, and they had flow charts all over the wall. And that was the start of Quickpen, but they called it computer aided estimating. And when they introduced it at the SMACTA conference in Washington, D.C. in the 80s, early 80s, going to 80, 81, Curtis was having dinner, and he heard this couple talking behind him, and he said, did you see that estimating software? He had that pen, man. It was so quick. And that's where the name Quickpen came from.
Oh, wow.
And so Curtis then took that function and created Quickpen estimating. And then there was other estimating products that followed suit, but it was one of the very first digitized estimating software.
What was it programmed in? Because there were limited languages.
Oh, there were. I mean, it was all archaic based, database driven type stuff, right? Paradox, I think, is one of the databases we used to use.
I remember.
Kind of
yes.
Yeah, and some of the early databases, and I think they even had Lotus reports at one time, right? It was all DOS based, but it was blazingly fast for what it could do. And Curtis, I believe, is an unsung hero in the world of.
So how did he absorb all those data points so that programmer could turn it into
I think it was an interesting, it was an evolution, right? Yeah. I mean, as things evolved over time, for example, I remember when you used to take off elbows, you'd have to double touch in the corner and then come back and take off the elbow, right? Eventually evolved that they could tell the X, Y, and Z. So when I touched point A and I touched point B, and now I went east to west instead of north south, it knew that I changed direction, and it would automatically put in a 90-degree elbow because it knew I changed directions, because it could calculate that for the way the digitizer works. It works on an XY position, right? So it was a really amazing program. And he, like I said, he was an unsung hero, I think, in the world of estimating. I think of the billions and billions and billions of dollars that have been saved probably over the years, over the last 40 years of what his estimating tool brought to the marketplace. I can't imagine.
So at what point did Trimble come along and say, "Oh, that's
it goes." We actually take a step further in the fact that Curtis also saw the vision of 3D modeling in the 90s. Of course, you realize back then there were some 3D CADs. There's a gentleman by the name of Joe Massaro, had a company called East Coast CAD, and they really, East Coast CAD on the eastern seaboard of the United States defined how to draw sheet metal ductwork, because they were drawing in 3D in the 90s and even earlier maybe. And because you think about construction guys, right? Very few construction guys walk into a room look around and then look at the floor and say, well, I'm going to lay out the ductwork by looking at the floor. And they say, no, I'm going to go
There's
that
Bill's
way.
2 cents, 2009. He's listening. And a
Yeah.
shout out to Steve Turner, my good buddy at Bring Back the Trades, founder of Bring Back the Trades, and Jesse Hernandez, the one and only Jesse Hernandez. I just want to make sure we acknowledge who's taken the time at least to show up. So
then you think about it. We all think in 3D anyways, right?
Right.
We look at the site. We're going to go up and around and over. So it made sense to draw in 3D. So they really started defining how to draw in 3D. And then came the idea, well, if I'm drawing in 3D, I can lay that ductwork out in the flat and then cut it with a plasma table. And plasma tables were coming around in that period of time. And so we were actually drawing in 3D and downloading the plasma tables way before BIM was even an acronym.
Wow.
And then, so Curtis saw the value in that and partnered with East Coast CAD to help bring it to the masses, and so forth. And Curtis also bought a company, small company called Colorado Pipe Systems, or Pipe, and they created the very first 3D piping CAD called Pipe Designer 3D that actually allowed you to draw mechanical systems. And it actually, for example, took into account in the 90s, the thickness of the B and G set between two flanges, right? That's how accurate it was. So you could create spool drawings for prefabrication. Once again, this is all pre-BIM, before BIM was even an acronym. Anybody was even thinking about it. We called it drawing in 3D. You think in 3D, why not draw in 3D? And so forth. So we're making bolt-ons to the AutoCAD environment to allow mechanical and sheet metal contractors to draw more efficiently, and do spooling and prefabrication. Began that process of prefabrication and so forth. This was all part of Curtis's vision, and he had some other programs that were probably years ahead of their time that are now considered every day. But back then they were tough to catch on because they were just so avant-garde.
Did you ever hear any other context of stuff going on and with what he was doing? I mean,
he had a barcoded tool asset program that he introduced in the year 2000, for tracking tools.
Is he still around? Is this guy?
Yeah, he lives. He's retired. He lives down south. So what happened was,
I see another live stream, Kipp.
So what happened? Oh, I would love to. You would love to get Curtis on.
I think he'd be dynamite.
And so
give us context to this whole idea.
And so then Curtis, bought a company called Mechanical Data, and they made the plasma table for lock former cutting tables, and that was started by a gentleman named Rob White. The three gentlemen that owned that company were Rob White, Alan Holman, and Morton Massey. Once again, I think they're ex-sheet metal. Rob was an ex-sheet metal contractor from the East Coast, from the Mid-Atlantic region, and just intelligent tradesmen who saw the vision of doing it differently. And I've been blessed in my career to work around these kind of guys. So when Curtis decided he wanted to kind of retire, he kind of sold the company to Rob and Morton Allen. And then in March of 2007 is when we got acquired by Trimble. April 2007 is when we got Quickpen got acquired by Trimble. A gentleman by the name of Pat Boley, who actually works for FARO now. But Pat started a new division at Trimble called the MEP division, and was building out a new division specifically devoted to a company that traditionally worked in the world of GIS and civil construction and GC, but were just dabbling in the MEP trades. So Pat came into that fold and developed a budding business within the Trimble called Trimble MEP that still exists today. And so they bought Quickpen. They bought the AccuBid estimating software out of Canada for electrical estimating, and then have bought some other CAD applications since then. But back then, one of the very first BIM white papers or case studies was done by a company called View by View in around 2004, 2005-ish. And they drew all the mechanical systems in Pipe Designer 3D. The sheet metal was all drawn by a company, CAD out of England, out of Blackpool, England, called MapCAD. that drew all the sheet metal CAD.
Now tell about this case study though, but that's around George Lucas and Industrial Light and Magic.
Correct. Yeah. So that was called the Letterman Digital Arts Center, I think it was called. And it was owned by George Lucas. There's a museum inside of it for all the Star Wars memorabilia and all that kind of stuff. And it was one of the very first BIM case studies that was done during that period of time. They actually used, they did collision checking. They drew the entire project in 3D and then gave the subcontractors all the information out of the 3D model prior to construction. And then, in the conversations I had with the gentleman that did it for view by view, he said, they did that massive project with only like 3 or 4 change orders simply because everybody knew exactly what was going to occur.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it became that, and then of course that kind of snowballed from there out into the, into other sections of California, saying this is what we want to do, simply because of the cost savings that existed around that kind of function. And then BIM, BIM just became a thing. And then of course, then Jetstream came on, which is now commonly known as Navisworks. But back then, Jetstream was they were out of Sheffield, UK, I think they came out of. And Jetstream it was like a compartmentalized thing. So you had Roamer,
I want to stop you for a second now.
Render, quantification, publisher. These were all the modules that came out of that were in Navisworks or Jetstream at that time.
When you bring up the Europeans, I always think to myself that they seem to be more advanced, at least in terms of the level usage of BIM. Well, when we talk about level 3, level 4.
They are, simply understand, here in the United States, we're kind of spoiled. What I mean by that, North America, we build new buildings. We don't, especially back in the 80s and 90s, there was no adaptive reuse going on, right? There was so much, you just build a new building, but in Europe, they don't have that land mass, right? So the concept of adaptive reuse was part and parcel of their construction process, and their construction processes are different than ours. And so forth. And so they understand that they have to work around pre-existing conditions and existing conditions much more so than we did in that period of time. And so they were quicker to adopt the idea of realizing, look, I got to make sure everything fixed because I've got fixed space here. I don't have this unlimited ceiling space anymore, right? Back then, buildings were, I think about one of the first houses I rented when I moved to the UP was built in 1910. And of course, back then I'm 6'3". I literally, I'm not, the garage doors were small and all that kind of stuff, right? Because people were smaller back then. And so when you think about that, the Europeans were very fast to adopt the BIM approach.
They were
because they didn't really have a choice, and that's certainly my opinion. And I've talked to several members from the UK, and they kind of feel that way as well. So they've really driven the adaptive reuse, and their government obviously has even gotten behind it, and have created national BIM standards and that kind of thing. And of course, we're a little more still a little bit Wild West here in the United States, so we really haven't got to a national standard yet. But there certainly is. I think there's with the Building Smart and some of the other initiatives that are going on throughout the United States, I think we're certainly driving deeper and deeper into that direction. I don't know if we'll ever see it. I'll ever see it in my lifetime, but you never know it.
Do you believe in the strictness of the levels and the adoption and
I think there's such a thing as there's a level of detail and a level of accuracy.
Yeah. Right.
Obviously the different LOD levels, and it's interesting. There's multiple LOD levels out there, and there's really there's more and more consistency now because it's become such a part of everything we do. Back then the LODs were all over the place. But right now I think more and more is being modeled because the technology's caught up. And
I just stop you for a second and you just explain LOD, just make sure that everybody.
So the level of detail, right? So like the way you think about it is a half, if it's a half inch or smaller, am I going to draw it? Yes or no, right? That might be one aspect of a level of detail, right? Is it fabricatable? That could, is it an LOD 100, 200, 300, 400?
What would be the level of detail?
I think most construction sites today are done right around a 300 level. very few construction sites are done 400 or 500.
Exactly.
Very few.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very few. And what
Yeah.
kind of use case would that have to be at a level 5?
That's going to be a high purity scenario, probably a nuclear facility. Something along that lines,
Yep.
right? Where high tolerances are required. And then, of course, that's where reality capture really starts to, shine and so forth. And I think we'll touch on that a little bit later. But that LDAC was the first case study and so forth. And BIM just kind of snowballed from that point. I think Gensler, if I remember correctly, I'm 60 years old, at least I still have a memory. But I think Gensler was the architect. H&K, I think, was the name of the company, or
Wow.
HKS was the engineering company, something along that lines, right?
Well, for those in the audience that want it, I mean, Kipp has dug up the actual case study we're talking about, and I can't believe it. But
so we talked about this.
To share that link, man, because
when we first talked about it, when we first met here about a week or so ago, and we were having this conversation, and you're like, can you think you could find that case study? I said, I don't know. So, literally last night at 3:00 in the morning, I'm sitting up thinking to myself, and all of a sudden this view by view clicks in my head. I go, view by view. That was the name of the company that ran it. And so then I just got up this morning, went to view by view, and I found the article. I said, right there it is. So
and when you said it, was like, wow, this looks old school. And then, but of course, when you're looking,
right, because it was written in
2004.
Yeah.
2004. I mean, that seems like ancient to.
It is in a technology space. It is absolutely. When you think about it, right? I think about the concept of even something like a laser scanner, the world that I'm in today.
Right.
In 2009, I was working on a scanner that had a battery on it. It looked like you jumpstart the space shuttle, right? It was 140 pounds of gear. And here we are 10 years later, now capturing 7, 8, 10 times the data in 1/10 the time that scanner works on a device that weighs less than a toaster. So the how fast, it's just like an iPhone. These are so ubiquitous in our life today.
Truth, yeah.
We don't realize these are 10 years old max.
Right. It's crazy
from an iPhone perspective, right? Yeah. So it's amazing to me how fast the technology has moved. But I also, what's amazing to me is how fast the construction trades have adopted these technologies faster than everybody outside of us. For what I mean by that is, I remember when BIM first came out, and guys used to come to me all the time and they'd say, Kipp, do you guys have that BIM software? And I'd sit back and I said, well, you realize that doesn't exist, right? There's no such thing as the BIM software. That BIM was a process. It's not a thing. It's not an it. It is a process. It is a process that can be achieved through a multitude of resources, right? We sold in one of those applications, and so did others at that time. But there was no such thing as the BIM software. Revit today is still considered, quote, people call it the BIM software, only because that's kind of the moniker that's just stuck to it, but it's really not, right? It's part of the BIM process, but it's not, quote, the BIM software. But people used to ask me all the time, Kipp, where do I find a good detailer? And I'd take a step back and I said, go look in your shop. And they go, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what do you mean? What is it easier to teach CAD or is it easier to teach the trade? I will argue that I can teach CAD to a tradesman a lot faster than I can ever teach a trade to a draftsman.
Now that's a quote right there. That's a quote, yeah.
And so, we really believed, in even the Quickpen days and in those early Trimble days, we really believed in hiring tradespeople, and tradesmen and people with industry experience, because that's how these newer technologies were going to be driven into the market and adopted, and so I still believe that today, which is why, some of the things I've done since I've been here at FARO is partnered with the Ken Schneider at the ITF, the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, and the ITI, because I believe in getting this technology in the hands of the skilled trades. Because it's not a case of if they're ever going to, touch the style of technology, or if they're ever going to be involved in a BIM project, or if they're ever going to be involved in the world of 3D reality capture. There's no longer an if.
Steve and I talk
right?
about that all the time, Kipp. It's
Yep.
like, that's also part of, acknowledging that in the trades. Well, first of all, I mean, I have to say, big shout out to me for having met you, because it's just high time we find people that can talk turkey about tech in the way that it's supposed to be. It's a part of the process to get to the output of the building or the structure. It's nothing more than that. And you have to adapt it to each situation, because it is a process, not a
technology is like water.
Yeah.
Right? It seeks its own level with each individual company or each individual organization to a certain point, right? And then all of a sudden you reach this point of inflection where you either continue to learn how to swim in that technology pool, or you drown in it. And what happens is everything starts with three basic functions: adoption, education, and implementation, right? Every piece of technology, I don't care if it's BIM, I don't care if it's CAD, I don't care if it's estimating, I don't care if it's laser scanning, it does not matter. It all revolves around education, implementation, and adoption. And our industry, certain aspects of our industry, the construction as a whole, have been slow to adopt. Others have been much faster. And so forth. But now I believe you're beginning to see this coalescence around various technologies, and that it's now no longer considered to be something that a specialist would do, but something that a generalist would do. I think about you ever see the movie Prometheus?
No.
All right. So
good point on Don.
Yep.
I mean, again, that's why we need the Kipps of the world, so that they can, well, they basically been there, done it at all levels. So the respect to the trades. This is why Don's saying he's seen scenarios where the modeling of services are layered without having the input from the trades. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with Jesse Hernandez about this. It's like, it's just, it just blows my mind.
Well, I can grab Revit right now, and I can draw a sheet metal I can draw a sheet metal fitting that either can't be made or shouldn't be made. Let's put it that way, right? Because once again, many of these applications are parametric, right? In other words, you can input data and so forth and so on. And there, sometimes the push-pull function in Revit can cause as many problems downstream as it does help, right? So so there's always that aspect of the trade that I think needs to be part of these technologies. I think about when I was selling estimating software, and I used to talk to somebody, and I tell them, one of the intangibles about selling estimating software was, let's say I work for a sheet metal company or mechanical company, and I've got, these old school estimators have been doing it their entire life. They sit there with a piece of chew in their mouth, and they're spitting in a cup while they're estimating, and they're doing all these kind of things because they got all this knowledge stuck in their brains. But all of a sudden I bring in all these young bucks, and I try to teach them how to estimate and so forth. And guys used to say, well, I don't need that estimating. I got Bob. And I used to say, yeah, but what happens if Bob gets hit by a bus? Then where are you? Wouldn't it be better if you took Bob's knowledge, stuck it into at least as much as you possibly can into a computerized estimating software, so that you can have some standardization around the concept of what is estimated and how it's estimated, so that if Bob does get hit by a bus, my company can still function? Then all of a sudden somebody hitting the brakes because Bob's dead, so I think the existing same work around, CAD applications around the same function.
Yeah, but if you don't even have to talk about, something like, if Bob dies. I mean, at the end of the day, we have labor deficits. We all know this. And we don't need to talk about it anymore. We need to keep doing things about it. And I do think that the right technology and salespeople and marketing teams need to make sure that the message is exactly that it's there to it's about the right technology for the right scenario.
It's always about the right tool for the right job.
That's it.
Always, right?
You do that.
Yeah.
You do that when you don't, you don't put a skid steer, on a highway project. I mean, you do. I mean,
It's good. My dad used to tell me all the time, the most expensive tool in the toolbox is the one you don't have, right? And so, I see Bill's listening in. Bill, like myself, his father, gosh, how many years he spent at Duckmate Industries, right? Almost his entire career. His father was an amazing man. Spent his entire world, could probably have galvanized in his blood. And now I actually do have galvanized in my blood from welding poisoning, but that's a whole nother story. But I just think about all these technologies and how they've adapted over the years and how we've adapted them as an organizations and so forth. The range of BIM today. I was on a call this morning, and I'm looking at these internal and external processes. No longer is it just a 2D and a 3D world. Now you're 2D, 3D, 4D world, right? You got people talking about, now we want to be able to not even just not drop it, put in the time element. I want to put in cost elements, right? So now you're getting in 5D, 6D information. It's ballooned so dramatically, but I believe it has improved our construction processes.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it is certainly, I honestly believe that, the ability to download and, fabricate from sheet metal, has probably one of the fastest ROIs, probably a fastest ROI in the industry that I've ever seen as a plasma table in the sheet metal industry. But I remember I gave a talk years ago. Dan Bully invited me to talk in Chicago, and I talked about the line in the sand, and I talked about growing up in the Rust Belt of the United States, which is predominantly signatory or predominantly union. You could go to in those early days in the 80s and so forth. You could see what was a union or a non-union job, and it all revolved around education, right? And that's really what it involved around, was standardized education.
Yeah.
And the new line in the sand, though, technology's blurred that line. And so, I can make the same sheet metal fittings that anybody else can, whether I'm a union or non-union contractor. The new line in the sand are those that adopt to those technologies and those that don't. That's the line in the sand that we live in today. Those that choose to adopt the BIM strategies and the technologies, and those that don't. I think there will always be those that can say those worst words ever. We've always done it this way, but I don't see very many of those anymore.
People like you and me have to make it so that it's understandable and digestible, so that I'll say, even from a demographics perspective, the hesitation is perhaps our generation didn't grow up with tech. And so therefore there's been a certain hesitation around digital adoption for that very reason. But to me, you're a shining example of someone in our generation who grew up and evolved with it, understood where to adapt it, understood how to help it and find the network to build it and build it out. Now we have to get the newer people that are going to come in and replace these guys, and some, gals are coming in more and more all the time, but make people understand that it's just another tool. It has to be respected like you respect any other tool.
Everything that we've talked about, whether it's CAD, whether it's an estimating solution, whether it's a 3D scanner, any of those kind of functions are just that. They are just tools. And what most contractors want to know is how is this going to help me and how is it going to make me money, right? That's it. Because they're just tools. I want to be able to put in
nobody buys anything.
It's a drill motor that can put in a screw faster.
That's it.
Right? That's what it is. And and we have a tendency to overthink these things as an industry, I think, and even as I see that even internally, right? we
Yeah, but
have a tendency to
there's an
overthink.
elitism that I feel, we're finally getting over.
Well,
Uh,
and I think that's what
yeah,
happened with BIM in the early days. BIM
yeah,
became this massive balloon, and everybody just
yeah.
jumped on the BIM horse, and everybody's just whipping it as they're riding through the fields, trying to figure out what it was. But everybody's trying to figure out what it was. But many people succeeded, and other people failed. And it takes organizations, and I've been blessed to have worked around a lot of people that are a heck of a lot smarter than I am. And it's like one of those old sayings: if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. And um, and and I firmly
Look at the. Is that true of the room you're in right now?
well, like that's what I mean. I mean, we don't hire smart people. We don't hire smart people because we want to tell them what to do. We hire smart people because we want them to tell us what to do, right? That's why we hire smart people. That's why we should hire smart people, and because
Yeah, but I'd even say that smart. I mean, smart is a perspective.
smart is a perspective.
What you know.
Whether it's street smart, industry smart,
That's
right?
it.
Knowledge. It's like some people heard me say this, and they've heard me say this in FARO a lot. There's two different things between training and knowledge, right? Training is how I teach somebody to turn the scanner on. Knowledge is how I teach them to make money with it. And I think that's the same thing with the industry, right? I can train somebody to be a sheet metal worker, but the knowledge is how they can then make a living at being a sheet metal
But
worker.
that's the trade, and that's the lack of respect for the trades, and that's this ridiculous argument between 4-year program and 2-year program. It's just another way to consume the knowledge that you will go out and apply in your job, whether you're sitting behind a desk and a computer or whether you're in the field, measuring drywall and installing drywall. You tell me.
I mean, there's certain parts of the construction industry I never want to do, and hanging drywall and taping and mudding is one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
but
that being a rougher, that's just takes a special individual to do that kind of work.
But having said that, I mean, I'm going to start getting into my bring back the trades thing. But that's why this respect has to be for the tradespersons, because even where we haven't, turned Spot the Robot on that idea yet, gathering all that data, all that unique inputs that robot would have to be capable of, we still have to get back to the respect for the tradesperson, because in order to use your BIM tool, you still need the guy finally to be able to drive.
I remember I was at a UA event having a conversation. This was when I was working at Trimble. I had worked for Trimble in the MEP division for almost 10 plus years. And this is right when MEP total stations came out, when the Trimble had, developed. As a matter of fact, if you read that LDOC White study, they talk about it was one of the very first use cases even to use a laser pointing total station. Anyways, as the MEP moving forward a number of years, I remember having a tradesman come into the booth, and he was kind of complaining about the use of a total station for laying out, for using. He said that the total station was taking man hours away from his men, and I said, it's interesting you feel that way, and I said, I believe I completely disagree. I believe we're improving the work life for guys. And he goes, well, in what way? And I said, well, how many journeymen do you know that wake up in the morning and say, you know what I want to do today? I want to get on my hands and knees on galvanized corrugated decking and lay out hangers. That's what I want to do today. Zero. That is a mundane task that nobody wants to do, period. So if I can make you do it better and faster, that means that job is going to be done better and faster. That means your contractor is going to make more money. That potentially means he's going to get more work, means he's going to hire more tradesmen, because it's not a replacement. It is an augmentation of something that you do every day.
And that tradesperson's knees are saved. How about that?
Yeah. And that's the same thing with laser scanning, right? And I know we're probably going to do a part 2, and we're going to, this one is kind of focused on the world of BIM. And I think we talked about possibly doing a part 2 focusing on the reality, because, as you can see, talking is not one of my problems. Depending on your point of view. But
I didn't see you pour another bourbon either. You haven't even sipped it.
I did not, I did not put a bourbon in my hand because I felt it would be unprofessional. So,
Okay, all right. All
but
right. It's your birthday.
even though
Just
it
so
is my
everybody
birthday,
knows, it's his. Yes, everybody who joined us late, it is his
right?
birthday, so
You
he's
know,
entitled.
and you know, and as we move forward and we start thinking about the world of 3D reality capture and 3D realization and so forth, once again, that is an augmentation to the BIM process. It is also an augmentation to the existing processes that exist in construction. And I think, we all in our industry, like BIM was a shiny word, right? Digital twins, the new shiny word.
Yes.
You can't pick up a trade magazine without see the word digital twin something out there. I mean, I just saw some guy that posted on LinkedIn he did a digital twin of a rock, and I'm like, well, okay, well, we need to really have a conversation about what digital twin actually is. Um,
And we will.
well, and once again, if somebody wants homework, they can look up the definition of digital twin by Dr. Michael Greaves. That came out around 2002, I think he was when he was, but it was really focused around the world of PLM, which is product lifecycle management, and so forth. If there is an academic definition of digital twin, we've extrapolated it to mean much more things. And I think hopefully in the next one, we'll talk a little bit more about what I believe the stratification of digital twin should be in the world of reality capture. And where we at FARO see that is, as far as Hollow Builder goes,
And we're hitting
and
the
so
we're
forth.
hitting the 45-minute mark here, so I don't generally like to run, two talking heads, and let's be honest.
Well, I could talk. Look, I could probably talk for another hour.
I know, but what I want to make sure our audience gets is they're going to get takeaway. So you and I are going to collect ourselves and decide, what links will show up on my YouTube channel, and we'll set a time to do part 2 and do a deeper dive. I think honestly, when we talk about the systemic problems between technology, the labor shortage, and so on, these things need to be serialized so that people like you and I and others that get this clearly on this live stream tonight, that we foster the right messages at the right time holistically to the network. Because to your point, there's so much talk out there, but it's also misinformation, and these definitions aren't clarified well enough and then contextualized. And it's a big lift, but I think it's essential. It's just absolutely essential. And I just want to, give a little bit of a shout out here now for, exactly, you work with FARO. I think
do.
it's fair that people know what they
Yeah.
do, and
Yeah.
basically it's all about measurement.
Yeah, you think about FARO. So FARO actually stands for Fraser and Robb Orthopedics, right? A lot of people don't realize that FARO got its start actually measuring bones, and we're actually what's commonly referred to as a 3D metrology company, right? And not meteorology, that's the weather. Metrology is the science of measurement, and so we actually have devices that we can measure down to the thickness of a human hair. And we can measure it 100 meters. We can measure it at a 2 millimeter accuracy at 100 meters. We can measure it 1/100th of an inch with a tracker. And of course, then we've got the laser scanning, which reality capture, which really adopts itself into the world of construction. Because you think about the world of reality capture. There's this teeter totter that exists, right? And on that teeter totter, one side is time and the other side is accuracy. Now, what weights that teeter totter down is the amount of data that's collected. So, right now in FARO, and you brought up the Hollow Builder. Hollow Builder for us is that fast, lightweight capture tool. And then in the middle, we've got the GeoSlam, which is the
you're gonna have to talk a little bit about the GeoSlam.
Yep.
You just bought
and then the LiDAR collection, which is the FARO Focus. But we'll talk more about reality capture in depth coming up in part 2. I think we'll have some very interesting, hopefully some things out about coming out. I hope to have a thought paper out pretty soon.
Yeah, you're working on a paper. You
told around the adoption of Hollow Builder and where I see it fit within the digital world. Certainly within the circular reference of digital comparisons and digital realization capture and construction. So I look forward to that.
Well,
that
I
next
can't thank
conversation.
you enough. I mean, we started, as far as I'm concerned, peeling back, the curtain on the realities of these things. But as I said to you, I mean, I was so thrilled when you agreed to come on, because it's depth and scope that we need around the conversation and the contextualizing of these various processes and sometimes technologies. I want to give a quick shout out to everybody who took the time tonight to jump on. So again, Steve Turner, founder of Bring Back the Trades, Jesse Hernandez of Learning and Missteps, his podcast and all he's doing with his no hashtag BS with Jen Lacey. Bill Bradford, I'm sure is very, very familiar.
I've known Bill for years.
Yep. Don Fournier. I even have a relative on here, my cousin Dennis, I haven't seen in years. So thanks for jumping on. And of course, Anton made the initial introduction to you. Can't thank him enough. And Mike Zivanovic.
Mike Zavanovich. Mike's ex-trade. He's a UA tradesman.
Yeah.
He's a scanning guru. Actually, he would be a wonderful guest for you to talk about. He's a certified FARO instructor and so forth. But
I like that part. He's talking about the learning, right?
He's a very educated man in the world of construction. I would consider Mike Zavanovich a fellow construction dork for sure. So
that's fantastic. Well, Mike will be in touch. And again, Kipp, thank you so much. Go get yourself a drink, and happy 60th birthday to you. You earned your stripes.
Yeah, well, Stephanie, thank you for your time, and to everybody here, please if we don't have the opportunity to touch one-on-one, please have a blessed holiday season with your family.
Indeed. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.